Welcome to our .NET session. We would be basically introducing you to C# environment, what is C# language, what is .NET framework. We would be starting with the differences between what is a C#, what is .NET framework and all. We'll move on to understanding what is CLR, that is the Common Language Runtime. We would also learn about some architecture of .NET framework, and then we would move on with creating our first application in .NET. Now here we are working with C#, so we would be basically creating a C# language. Using C# language, we would be creating ASP.NET application. So coming to the .NET training, this is the introduction part to it. We would be starting with the core .NET concepts, okay, wherein we would learn from the basics of C# language, and then moving on ahead, how to create ASP applications, what different types of controls do we have in ASP.NET which we can use. Then we'll move on with creating a login page example. Like normally we, on every site nowadays, we have a login form, which we have to fill up the username, password, and we have to log in there. So how to give a connectivity of such login form with the database also we would be looking at. So basically we would be also covering the ADO.NET part in this. Again, we would be creating a Flappy Bird game. We'll be creating a chatbot using .NET architecture. We'll also see how to create an online examination system using ASP.NET and creating a Bunifu game. So in today's session, we would be going ahead and understanding about basics of C# and the ASP.NET application framework. We would also understand about what is C# programming. We would write some basic programs in that, and we would understand what different types of variables we can create in C#. So over here, if you just look at it, we have various differences between C# and the .NET framework. So basically we have .NET, which is nothing but a framework, but we say C#, it is an application. So over here, we can go ahead and just understand about the programming language. So as I have told you, C# is a language like we have understood about, if some of us know about C and C++. Now these two are the earlier languages which we had prior to C#. So in both of these languages, basically we used to compile our application. The compiler translated the code into the native code. And then that particular native code was basically for a particular machine. So if I'm executing a particular code on my machine, that same code would not execute on some different machine. That was the basic disadvantage of those two languages, because of which we had C# and .NET framework into picture. Because basically now what happens is whenever I write my C# programs using .NET framework, it is compiled into an MSI language, which is nothing but the intermediate language. And then depending on whichever machines you use, automatically that intermediate language is then transferred to your machine language. So it doesn't matter on what machine you're executing your code now. So we can also use various other languages in .NET framework, not just C#. We can also use F#, VB.NET, etc. as different languages in the same framework. Now there are two major components in CLR. One is your class libraries, which can be used for building the application. So we'll see what is CLR, and we'll also see what are class libraries. Let's move on further. So as we had told, prior to C#, we had two languages, which was C and C++. Now the compiler used to translate the code into the native code for the particular machine. So when Microsoft was basically designing the C# language, and along with that, it has also designed the .NET framework. Now they had borrowed this idea from the Java community, because if you just have an idea in Java, your codes or your applications can run on any operating system. It is not system specific. So similarly, in Java, like you compile a particular code, it gets translated to the intermediate language, or we also call it as a bytecode language. Now, similarly over here, if you look at in .NET, we have it compiled into an IL language. We call it as an intermediate language, okay, or even IL. Now that IL is then compiled to a native code, which is done by the CLR. So CLR plays a very important role over here in the .NET framework. And then this particular native code can run on any particular machine on which you're executing it. So if we move ahead, we can see the various .NET architecture over here. We have a class, which is nothing but a container, which can have some data. Okay, now data can be your attributes, your variables, your methods, or your functions. Any of these we can classify it as attribute or even functions. So a class can have multiple attributes, can have multiple functions. Example, you can take car as a class. Okay, now car class basically can have what different types of attributes. Its make would be different, its model would be different, color would be different. So I can say these all are my variables. Similarly, a car can have different functions, like a car can start, it can stop, it can move. So these are the functions for a particular car class. So all of these is nothing but a collection of your in a particular class. And a namespace is collection of such classes. So we have a namespace, we have multiple classes in a namespace. In a class, we have multiple attributes or multiple functions or methods. That's how our concept of .NET architecture is basically all about. Now, let's move ahead and understand what are we going to learn here. We have understood the architecture about how the .NET programs are getting compiled. We have known what is CLR. Now let's implement this or create this into practically how can we create these applications now.